Snow drifted across the prairie like a long, wandering hymn, carried by a wind that seemed older than memory itself. Hollis Ward leaned forward in the saddle, the brim of his hat white with frost, his breath rising in lonely clouds that disappeared into the dusk. Christmas Eve held no celebration for him anymore. It was merely another winter night hollowed by loss. His ranch waited behind him like a weary old friend, lights dim, as if even the house had learned to grieve. 2 winters had passed since he buried his wife beneath the cottonwoods, yet the wound inside him remained tender, refusing to freeze or heal. He rode because he couldn't bear the silence. He rode because the ache in his chest needed somewhere to go. And in that drifting white quiet, something caught his eye, a line of tracks cutting crookedly through the snow. They were light, faint, the footsteps of someone stumbling rather than walking. Something about them tugged at him, as though the wind itself whispered, "Look closer, Hollis. Someone needs you." He tugged the reins, slowing his horse. The tracks wandered toward a stand of winter-stripped willows near the frozen creek. Hollis scanned the horizon, his instincts tightening like wire. Folks didn't travel this far from town on a storm-bent evening unless they were desperate, or running. His horse let out a low grunt, ears tilting forward. That's when he saw the figure. A woman lay folded against the snowbank, red hair tangled with frost, her thin dress whipped by the wind as if the night were trying to carry her away. She clutched a small satchel to her chest, the last thread holding her to this world. Hollis swung down and knelt beside her. Her skin was cold as river glass, breath shallow, lashes silvered with ice. For a moment he simply looked at her, this stranger carved out of silence and hardship, wondering how many miles of sorrow she had walked before collapsing at the edge of his trail. Her eyes fluttered at the sound of his voice. "Ma'am," he murmured, his tone low but steady, "can you hear me?" She tried to sit up, but her limbs trembled, refusing. Her voice was a cracked whisper. "Please, don't take me back to town." The words punched through the cold more sharply than the wind. "Not help me or save me, but don't take me back." Something awful waited behind her fear. Something with teeth. "I ain't taking you anywhere you don't want to go," Hollis said. "Let me help you up." Her gaze searched his, full of doubt carved by too many cruel nights. Still, she allowed him to slip an arm beneath her shoulders. She weighed almost nothing. Hollis lifted her onto his horse, feeling the tremor in her body, the fragile trust she forced herself to give. Rumors had been circling Willow Bend these past weeks, about a settler woman abandoned by her wagon group, blamed for misfortunes she never caused. The gossip painted her as cursed, unlucky, a bringer of bad omens. Hollis didn't care for gossip. It had nearly destroyed him once. Still, as he mounted behind her and felt her shiver against him, he wondered if she was the same woman. The wind sliced harder as they rode, stinging his cheeks. She leaned slightly into him for warmth, not out of desire but survival, and he steadied her gently. Hollis wasn't a man for words, never had been. His kindness lived in what he did, not what he said. And tonight, he simply rode faster. After a long mile, she spoke again, voice thin as thread. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to trouble anyone." "You ain't trouble," Hollis answered. "Not to me." Her breath hitched, as if those simple words carried more mercy than she knew how to hold. The glow of Hollis's cabin flickered through the trees, a warm ember fighting the dark. The horse trotted into the yard, snow crunching under hoof. Hollis felt her sag against him, body losing its last scrap of strength. Inside, the lantern light spilled across the room in soft amber waves. Hollis carried her over the threshold, boots thudding quietly against the floorboards. The cabin smelled faintly of pine and old sorrow, but tonight it felt changed, filled with a presence that unsettled and steadied him at once. He laid her on the cot near the fire. As the warmth touched her skin, she winced, as though recovering from cold stung worse than the cold itself. Hollis wrapped her in his thick wool blanket. She held it as if it were the first kindness she'd felt in months. "Thank you," she whispered, barely audible. He nodded, placing a tin cup of water near her trembling hands. She tried to sip but nearly dropped it. Hollis steadied the cup without touching her directly, letting the gesture speak its quiet language. After a moment, she whispered, "I wasn't running from the cold." Hollis didn't press. He only met her gaze with a steady calm that beckoned truth without demanding it. "I was running from people," she said, voice shaking. "From what they believed about me." Her fingers clutched the satchel as if it protected her from the weight of her memories. Hollis noticed how tightly she held it, like a shield. "You're safe here," he said simply. Tears gathered in her eyes, glistening like melted ice. She closed them, letting exhaustion claim her. Slowly, she drifted into a restless sleep, her breath uneven, haunted by whatever past had driven her into the storm. Hollis pulled a chair beside her, watching the firelight dance across her face. She looked younger when she slept, almost childlike beneath the bruise of fear. Something uncoiled faintly in his chest, a feeling he hadn't let himself touch in years, a sense of wanting to protect someone simply because they needed protecting. He should have gone to stable the horse. He should have banked the fire. But he stayed, studying the fragile stranger fate had placed at his doorstep on this cold Christmas Eve. The storm outside howled against the windows, rattling them like bones. Somewhere in the wind, Hollis thought he heard a faint voice, hers, whispering a name. A man's name. He leaned forward, heart tightening. Whoever she whispered for wasn't here tonight. And Hollis suddenly understood. Someone else might come looking for her. Morning seeped slowly into the cabin, a pale gold light slipping through the frost-laced window panes like a quiet blessing. Hollis Ward had not slept. He sat in the wooden chair beside the cot, elbows resting on his knees, watching the stranger breathe in uneven rhythms. She slept as someone who had been hunted by cold and memory alike, flinching in dreams, fingers curling around the blanket as though afraid it might vanish. When she stirred, Hollis straightened. Her eyes fluttered open, blue as thawing ice, startled by warmth she clearly hadn't expected. She tried to sit up too quickly and winced. He lifted a hand, gentle, not touching, only guiding. "Easy. Take your time." The woman's throat bobbed as she swallowed. She glanced around the small cabin, rough-hewn walls, iron stove, shelves lined with jars of dried herbs and winter goods. The fire crackled softly, casting an amber glow that felt almost tender. Her gaze returned to him. "Where am I?" "My place," Hollis said. "South ridge of Willow Bend. Found you by the creek last night." A shadow crossed her face, as if those few words pulled her back into the cold she tried to escape. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I must have caused you trouble." "You didn't," he replied, and though his tone was quiet, it carried weight, unchallenged truth. She hesitated. "I shouldn't have been out there. Shouldn't have—" Her voice thinned until silence swallowed it. He waited. Hollis was a man who understood the pace of hurt. Grief taught him patience. Some truths needed coaxing, others simply needed room. She lightly touched her side, flinching at a bruise half hidden beneath the blanket. Hollis noticed the motion but didn't draw attention to it. Instead, he poured warm water into a tin cup and held it out. Her hand trembled as she took it. "Thank you," she whispered. Minutes passed. The storm outside had calmed, leaving the world muted as if listening. Finally, she said, "My name is Maribel Carter." She spoke it like a confession, not an introduction. "I was traveling with a settler group, headed west. But things went wrong." Hollis felt her words tightening around them like threads pulling a story taut. "Go on if you want," he said, not pushing, only offering a safe place for her voice to land. She set the cup down carefully, as though afraid she might drop it. "The group blamed me for everything. A wagon wheel cracked. They said I cursed it. A child fell sick. They said I'd brought misfortune. One night, a man's horse bolted. He claimed it was because I walked too near." She shook her head, bitterness piercing her tired features. "You can't reason with fear. Folks cling to superstition tighter than truth." Hollis understood. He'd felt the judgment of neighbors after losing his wife, whispers that maybe he hadn't prayed enough, worked enough, loved enough. Grief had a way of putting you on trial. "Why didn't you stay in town?" he asked softly. Her breath hitched. "Because Clara May Hensley got to me first." Hollis almost winced at the name. Clara May was the kind of woman whose tongue could strip bark off a pine. Mary Bell continued, voice frayed by memory. She said I'd bring ruin to anyone who let me stay. That I was a burden, a danger. The sheriff didn't defend me. I could see in his eyes he believed some of it. She wrapped the blanket tighter around herself, as if trying to hide inside it. I thought if I left on Christmas Eve, no one would notice. The truth of her despair settled heavily in the room, mixing with the warm fire and the scent of pine logs. Hollis felt something inside him shift, an ache not just of sympathy but of recognition. He knew what it meant to be quietly undone by the world. You shouldn't have had to walk alone, he said. She looked at him, startled by the quiet certainty in his words. Why are you being kind to me? He didn't answer right away. The flames crackled, throwing shifting shadows across the cabin floor. Because you're cold. Because you're hurt. Because someone ought to be. Her lips trembled, not from cold, but from the unfamiliar weight of kindness. She glanced at the window where the storm left glassy patterns. If I stay here, the town might think badly of you. Hollis shrugged a touch of weariness into his broad shoulders. Let them think. People always will. Something softened in her then, something cautious, fragile, the beginning of trust. She insisted on standing despite her weakness. When her knees wobbled, Hollis caught her elbow. She didn't pull away. She simply steadied herself, proud even in exhaustion. She looked at the small wooden table, the untrimmed pine tree he hadn't bothered decorating this year, the faded quilt his late wife had sewn. For a moment, she seemed to sense the ghosts inside the cabin. You live alone, she murmured. Hollis nodded. Just me. She studied him as though trying to puzzle out how loneliness carves itself into a man's posture, into the quiet behind his eyes. Your wife. Passed, Hollis said gently. Mary Bell bowed her head. I'm sorry. Don't be. His voice was steady but distant, like a man speaking across a canyon carved by time. Hours later, after she managed a few bites of food and walked a slow lap around the room, she paused near the hearth. She touched the edge of the mantel where Hollis kept a single lantern, its glass cracked. You fixed this last night, she said softly. I saw you. He blinked. You were awake? Barely. She hesitated. Why fix something broken? Everything's worth fixin', if you give it time. Her eyes shimmered with something unspoken, hope or disbelief, he couldn't tell. She turned toward the window then, body stiffening. A sound carried faintly across the snow. Hollis rose slowly, instincts sharpening. Mary Bell's voice dropped to a trembling whisper. That sound. I know it. Her satchel slipped from her hands. Hollis, she said, breath strangled in her throat. Someone's looking for me. The sound that had startled Mary Bell faded into the white hush outside the cabin, but it left her trembling long after silence returned. Hollis stood beside her at the window, scanning the endless stretch of snow for movement. Nothing stirred except a lone tumble of frost drifting from a pine branch. Yet fear still clung to her like a second skin. It was just the wind, he said softly. Mary Bell shook her head. It wasn't. Her breath clouded the glass. I know the difference. Someone followed me from town. Maybe from the wagon group. They don't want me starting a new life. She swallowed hard. They want everyone to believe I'm cursed. Hollis didn't speak right away. His gaze stayed on the snow, jaw tight, as if calculating the shape of danger and how close it might be. Only when she stepped back, arms wrapped tightly around herself, did he turn toward her. You're safe here, he said. The words weren't loud, but they carried the weight of someone who meant them with his whole soul. She nodded, though fear still lingered in her eyes like a shadow that refused to lift. Later that afternoon, Hollis saddled his horse. We need supplies, he said. And the sheriff ought to know if someone's lurkin' outside my land. I can't go, Mary Bell whispered. Not after everything they've said. You're not fassin' 'em alone, he replied. That was as close as he came to promising protection. The ride into town was slow, the snow deepening with each mile. Maribel held herself stiff on the saddle behind him, fingers lightly gripping his coat, as if afraid even the smallest show of reliance would shame her further. Hollis felt the tension in her touch but said nothing. His warmth was steady, a kind of shelter that didn't demand gratitude. Willow Bend appeared like a cluster of stubborn hopes buried in winter. Smoke rising from chimneys, horses tied beside the saloon, lanterns glowing through frosted windows. But as Hollis and Maribel rode down the main road, eyes turned their way. Conversations quieted. A few glances sharpened into suspicion. Maribel lowered her head. "They're staring," she murmured. "Let 'em." Hollis nudged the horse forward. "They stared at me plenty after my wife passed. Never stopped me from livin'." Still, she looked smaller in the saddle, as if every whisper peeled away another layer of her dignity. Outside the general store, Clara May Hensley stood bundled in a fur-lined shawl, her beady eyes narrowing the moment she saw Maribel. She stepped closer, blocking their path with all the authority of a woman who enjoyed the sound of her own judgment. "Well now," Clara May drawled, "didn't expect to see you back in town, Miss Carter. Thought you'd finally taken your curse elsewhere." Hollis felt Maribel shrink behind him. Something inside him hardened. "That's enough, Clara May," she sniffed. "I'm only looking out for decent folks. This girl brought nothing but bad luck to her wagon party. Ask anyone." Maribel's voice trembled. "It wasn't my fault." "Oh, honey," Clara May crooned. "Misfortune follows some people the way dust follows cattle. And you." Hollis stepped off his horse so quickly her sentence snapped in half. His height alone made Clara May stiffen. "You don't know a thing about what she's been through," he said quietly. "So unless you're off-airing help, step aside." Clara May blinked, her mouth working soundlessly before she shuffled backward. "Suit yourself," Hollis warned. "But don't say we didn't warn you." He helped Maribel down from the horse without meeting her eyes, knowing pity would wound her further. She steadied herself, breath shaking. "You shouldn't have defended me," she whispered. "Now they'll think you're under my spell." Hollis almost smiled at the absurdity. "I don't believe in spells. Only people." Inside the store, the warmth was dimmer, the air thick with the scent of flour and leather. Men and women murmured among themselves, glancing at Maribel with sideways suspicion. Hollis gathered the supplies quickly, wanting to shorten her suffering. At the counter, Pastor Gideon Hale approached, hat in hand, his eyes soft with compassion rather than condemnation. "Hollis," he greeted. Then he bowed slightly to Maribel. "Miss Carter. Heard you'd left town last night. I'm glad you made it through the storm." Suspicion flickered in her gaze. Kindness from strangers had been rare. But his gentle tone eased some tension from her shoulders. "Pastor," Hollis said quietly. Someone might have followed her. "You hear anything?" The pastor's face darkened. "3 men rode out late last night. One of them was Lucas Crowley." Maribel flinched as though struck. Hollis saw it. "He was part of your wagon group?" She nodded. Fear coiled in her voice. "He blamed me for his brother's sickness. Said I brought it on. He threatened me before I left." Pastor Gideon pressed a steadying hand to the counter. "If Crowley's out there, he's not looking for peace." Hollis added a coil of rope and an extra lantern to the supplies, steps deliberate. Whatever danger was circling them, he wouldn't meet it unprepared. On the walk back to the horse, Maribel paused at the edge of town. "You shouldn't involve yourself," she said. "It isn't your burden." Hollis turned to her, snowflakes settling in his hair. "Maybe not. But no one deserves to be hunted for other folks' fears." Her lips parted as if she wanted to argue, yet something inside her softened instead. A flicker of trust, small, hesitant, but real, glimmered in her eyes. They rode home through gathering dusk. The world felt quieter after the tension of town, softer somehow. Yet beneath that softness lay a simmering danger neither spoke aloud. When they reached the cabin, Maribel exhaled shakily as if releasing the weight she'd carried all day. Hollis helped her down, fingers brushing hers for a single accidental moment that lingered longer than it should have. She didn't pull away. But as Hollis carried the supplies inside, he froze mid-step. Tracks, fresh ones, circled the far edge of his barn. Too large for a deer. Too deliberate for a stray traveler. Someone had been here. Recently. Maribel approached, her voice barely a breath. Hollis. What is it? He stared at the tracks, a cold certainty settling in his bones. They're not from me, he said. And they're not from you. The wind picked up, carrying the faint echo of movement somewhere in the trees. Maribel's eyes widened with dread. He found us, she whispered. The cabin felt smaller after Hollis found the tracks, its walls too thin, its windows too exposed. Maribel stood near the fire, hands trembling as she held the edge of the blanket around her shoulders. Outside, the wind dragged long sighs across the land, stirring old snow into ghostly shapes. Hollis watched the tree line through the window, jaw clenched, breath slow and calculating. Danger, once only a suspicion, had become a presence, silent, patient, watching. He won't leave, Maribel whispered. Not until he gets what he thinks he's owed. Hollis turned to her. What exactly does Lucas Crowley think you owe him? She looked down, fingers twisting in the wool. His brother fell sick. Fever took him fast. And instead of facing the truth, that the trail is cruel, that sickness chooses without mercy, he decided it had to be my fault. I was the outsider. The woman they didn't trust. Easier to blame me than fate. Hollis stepped closer, softening his voice. That's no reason to hunt someone. For men like Lucas, she murmured, hurt always needs a face. And I became that face. A log cracked sharply in the fire, making her flinch. Hollis felt something inside him tighten, a mix of anger and protectiveness he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. When his wife died, the world had settled into a numb stillness. But now, standing between Maribel and the man who wanted to grind her spirit into dust, Hollis felt a spark, small but alive. Sit, he said gently. Rest while I look around. Maribel obeyed reluctantly, sinking onto the chair. Hollis opened the door, stepping into the brittle air. Snow crunched under his boots as he circled the barn. The tracks were deep, made by a heavy man. A second set branched off toward the slope, lighter, perhaps from a horse tied somewhere out of sight. Hollis scanned the ridge, eyes narrowed. Crowley was near. Watching. Waiting. Back inside, the warmth felt fragile, like a thin veil draped over fear. Maribel looked up at him, searching his face for honesty or hope. Is he close? Hollis didn't lie. Close enough. A tremor passed through her. I'm bringing danger to your home. You're not bringing anything, Hollis replied. This is on him, not you. She opened her mouth but couldn't form an answer. Her eyes glistened with a mixture of shame and gratitude so raw he had to look away for a moment. As the storm outside thickened, the hours slipped by in strained quiet. Hollis kept to the window, every sense strung tight like a drawn bowstring. Maribel moved softly around the cabin, trying to be helpful, tidying, mending a torn dishcloth, refilling the kettle, but her hands shook too much to steady anything for long. Each time she crossed Hollis's line of sight, he noticed something new. The tired set of her shoulders, the fading bruise near her collarbone, the way she glanced at the door as if expecting it to burst open. You've lived scared too long, he said quietly. She paused near the table, voice barely a breath. I didn't used to be afraid. I had dreams once. A little farm. A life built with steady hands. She shook her head. But if enough people tell you you're cursed, you start to wonder if they're right. Hollis felt the old ache in him stir, a reminder of his own brokenness after his wife died, when he blamed himself for a fate no man could control. You ain't cursed, he said firmly. Just hurt. There's a difference. Her eyes lifted to his, and something shifted, small, but steady as a thaw beginning under snow. Night deepened around the cabin. Hollis lit another lantern, its glow casting warm halos across the wooden walls. Maribel approached him slowly, hesitant. You've done more for me in 2 days than anyone has in months, she said. I don't know why. Hollis looked at her, really looked. Because you needed help. And because I know what it's like to lose your place in the world. A fragile silence stretched between them, filled with warmth that neither dared name. Then, from the dark outside, a twig snapped. Maribel gasped. Hollis blew out the lantern in one swift motion, plunging the cabin into the dim glow of the fireplace. "Stay here," he whispered, stepping toward the window. A silhouette moved among the trees, too broad to be mistaken. Lucas Crowley. Maribel pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. "He'll hurt you," she whispered. "He doesn't care who he destroys." "He's not destroyin' anyone tonight," Hollis answered. The calm in his tone wasn't bravado. It was the quiet resolve of a man who had nothing left to lose except the fragile peace he'd finally begun to feel again. Crowley stepped into the clearing, lantern swinging from his gloved fist. Snowflakes glittered in the light, swirling around him like sparks. He called out, voice slurred with anger and cold. "Ward, I know she's in there. You hand her over, and I'll make this easy." Hollis opened the door and stepped out, pulling it closed behind him to block the sight of Maribel's terror. The cold hit him hard, but he stood tall. "You're not taking her anywhere." Crowley sneered. "She ruined everything for us. You think she won't ruin you next?" The wind carried Maribel's faint sob from inside, slicing Hollis with its helplessness. "Go home, Lucas," Hollis said, "before you do something you can't undo." Crowley reached for the rifle slung across his back. "She belongs to the bad luck she brings." Inside the cabin, Maribel clutched the satchel she'd kept hidden since the night Hollis found her. Her breath came in shallow bursts. She knew that if Crowley took her, she'd never see daylight again, not as a free woman. Hollis stepped closer to the edge of the porch. "You take one more step toward this cabin," he warned, "and you'll answer to me." Crowley cocked the rifle. "Then step aside." The metal gleamed under the lantern's flicker. Hollis did not move. Inside, Maribel's legs gave out, and she knelt by the cot, whispering, "Please don't die because of me." Tears soaked the blanket. She buried her face in her hands until her fingers brushed something in the satchel, a small wooden carving, edges worn smooth. It fell into her lap. A memory surfaced, shattering her breath. Hollis, outside, tensed as Crowley lifted the rifle to his shoulder. Maribel froze, staring at the carving, recognition dawning in her eyes like a rising dawn of dread. "Hollis," she whispered, trembling, "there's something I never told you." The wind howled. Crowley steadied his aim. And in that suspended heartbeat, the truth pressed itself against her chest with terrifying clarity. "Hollis," she choked out, "he isn't here for me alone." Hollis didn't hear Maribel's words through the door, but something in the air shifted, the kind of shift a man feels in his bones before he understands it in his mind. Snow whirled fiercely now, stinging his cheeks as he stared down the rifle aimed at him. Lucas Crowley's breath puffed in cold, furious clouds, his lantern swaying with every tremor of his anger. Hollis held himself steady, boots planted in the drifted snow, refusing to yield an inch. Behind him, the cabin glowed faintly with firelight, like a fragile promise he wasn't ready to lose. "This is your last warning," Hollis said, voice low, carrying more grit than volume. "Leave her be." Lucas snarled. "You don't know what she's done, Ward. You don't know the kind of ruin she brings. My brother died because of her. My family's shattered because of her. You think I'll let her walk free?" "She didn't kill your brother," Hollis answered. "Illness did. Bad roads did. Winter did." Crowley stepped closer, rifle raised higher. "And she survived every bit of it, didn't she? That's the curse. Everything around her falls apart, but she keeps living." His voice shook with grief he didn't know how to hold. "Someone needs to stop her before more people die." Inside, Maribel pressed her forehead to the windowpane, tears streaking down her cheeks. The wooden carving in her hands, small, shaped like a bird, felt heavier now that memory unraveled itself. She whispered a single name, one she hadn't dared speak aloud since the night the fever took her brother. Evan. Her brother and Lucas's brother had been friends since boyhood. And Evan had carved that bird as a gift to Lucas, not her. She was never supposed to have it. But she'd kept it anyway, a reminder that kindness had once existed before suspicion poisoned everything. Now she understood. Lucas wasn't just hunting her out of anger. He believed she had survived in Evan's place. In his grief, he had made her his symbol of unfair fate, a living reminder of who he'd lost. Hollis stood unmoving as Lucas took aim. Snow coated Hollis's hat brim, clung to his coat, gathered at his boots. "Put the gun down," he said. "You're looking for someone to blame, I get that. But you're standing in the wrong place, holding the wrong person accountable." Lucas's face twisted, more pain than fury. "You don't understand what it's like to lose someone you love." Hollis felt the words strike deep, reopening the quiet wound he carried inside. "I do," he said softly. "I lost my wife 2 winters ago. So don't tell me grief gives a man the right to hurt someone who never raised a hand against him." For the first time since arriving, Lucas faltered. His rifle dipped a fraction. But the storm howled harder, rattling his anger awake again. He stepped forward. "She's cursed, Ward. People die around her. You'll see soon enough. Your home will burn, your livestock will die, your life will rot." "That's enough," Hollis barked. His voice echoed off the ridge like a shot. Inside, Marybelle covered her mouth to stop a sob. She gathered her courage, pushed open the door, and stepped barefoot into the snow before Hollis could stop her. The cold bit instantly into her skin, but she didn't flinch. Hollis turned sharply. "Marybelle, get back inside." "No," she whispered. "This ends tonight." Lucas's eyes widened. His grip on the rifle tightened as if bracing to confront a ghost. "You've got some nerve showing your face." Marybelle held up the wooden bird, hands shaking. "This belongs to you." He blinked in confusion. "Where'd you get that?" "Evan carved it," she said. "He gave it to me the night he fell sick, because he knew you'd take his illness harder than anyone. He wanted you to have something to hold on to if he didn't make it. I kept it because I was afraid you'd break it in your grief." Tears carved warm paths down her frozen cheeks. "I'm sorry, Lucas. I never meant to take anything from you. Not then, not ever." Lucas stared at the carving as though seeing it, and her, for the first time. His breath faltered, but the rage still churned behind his eyes. "You survived," he whispered, voice cracking. "And he didn't." Marybelle nodded. "I asked myself every night why I lived. But your brother asked me to live. He begged me, Lucas. He said he wanted someone to remember him after the rest of the world stopped. That's what I've been carrying, not a curse." Wind swept between them, lifting snow in spirals. Hollis watched Lucas's face shift, pain, disbelief, and something fragile breaking open. But grief has teeth, and even truth cannot always quiet it. Lucas lifted the rifle again, hands trembling violently. "It should have been you," he whispered. Hollis stepped directly between them before Marybelle could react. "Then you'll have to go through me." Lucas's breath hitched. "Move." "No." Their standoff hung suspended, cold and deadly. Then Lucas's finger tightened around the trigger. Hollis braced, ready to lunge, ready to take the bullet if he had to. Before the shot could fire, the sharp crack of another gun split the air. Lucas jerked in surprise, the rifle flying from his hands and landing in the snow. Sheriff Boone stepped from behind a drift, pistol smoking, breath heavy. "Crowley, you're done," he said. "Drop to your knees." Lucas collapsed, not from injury but from the weight of everything finally snapping inside him. The sheriff secured him, muttering, "You're lucky I hit the rifle and not you." Marybelle crumpled, knees buckling in the snow. Hollis caught her instantly, gathering her gently against him as she shook from cold and fear. She clung to his coat, sobbing softly. He wrapped an arm around her, holding her as though anchoring something fragile back into place. Crowley was led away, shouting half-formed accusations that dissolved into broken grief. Hollis didn't look at him again. His only focus was the woman trembling in his arms. "Come on," he murmured, lifting her carefully. "Let's get you warm." Inside the cabin, Maribel sank near the fire, shivering uncontrollably. Hollis knelt beside her, rubbing her hands to bring back warmth. Her gaze rose to his, overflowing with gratitude and something deeper, something she feared naming aloud. "You stood in front of that gun," she whispered. "For me." "I'd do it again," he replied simply. Something inside her unraveled with that truth. She leaned forward, forehead resting against his chest. "I thought I brought misfortune," she murmured. "But you treat me like I'm worth something." Hollis lifted her chin gently. "You are." The firelit moment held steady, as if the world itself paused to breathe. Then, with a trembling exhale, Maribel opened her satchel and withdrew the wooden carving again. "I don't want to carry the past anymore," she said. "I want to build something new, if you'd have me." Hollis's heart stilled. Slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver ring, his wife's. He had kept it for years, unable to part with it, unable to imagine giving it to anyone else. Yet tonight, something felt right, fated even. "I reckon Christmas gave me a gift I never expected," he said softly. "And if you're willin', I'd like to build something with you too." Maribel covered her mouth with trembling fingers, tears shining like melted frost. Outside, dawn broke over the snow, painting the world gold. And inside, in the quiet warmth of a small cabin, two wounded souls finally stepped toward a life no longer shaped by fear, but by the hope they found in each other.